there, ladies and germs. Welcome back to the Zombie Ranch. I'm Reverend Buckwheat, and I'll be your host for the next half hour. In last week's episode, we featured some fine folks in Saudi Arabia making sure a likely innocent woman reached nirvana by separating her mind from her body with a sword. This week, we're traveling down to the other side of the world so we can have a good look at some boys down in Chile, throwing down in what appears to be somebody's backyard. In what can only be described as some twisted love child of bar brawling and mixed martial arts, we see an older gentleman getting down with a younger fella, and it's obvious by the friendly hand slaps and grandma out there trying to play referee that they're actually doing it for fun. That doesn't stop Junior from knocking this guy on his ass. And into next week. After Old School gets knocked on his ass with a good solid kick to the face, he gets up and then promptly dropped again with what they call a Superman punch. I shouldn't have to tell you why they call it that.
No, lo va a regalar a paz.
No, si aquel pelea vale todo, el culeo aquel, ¿no?
No, fue.
Basta. Basta.
Fue.
Oh, basta. No, basta. Tiene patada de negro, ¿no? También.
Dale.
Basta, negro, basta. Negro, basta.
If that wasn't enough of a reason to think Chile is just pretty fucking awesome, here's a few more reasons. With titties. In case you couldn't tell from last week's episode, where 30% of the show was devoted to firearm-related stories, I'm a bit of a gun nut. Now we're going to see some people that are hammering them out from scratch right there in their own garage. There's a lot of different reasons for doing it. We're going to see them. In the famed Khyber Pass, examples of British and Soviet military weapons are made in cottage huts by Afghan villagers who earn their living supplying people with functional firearms that would otherwise not be available. Examples of these firearms range in quality from wow, if it weren't for misspelling the name I'd think it was real, to holy shit, you made this with an angle grinder, some duct tape, and parts from an old refrigerator. In other parts of the world, like South America, the Philippines, Caribbean island nations, etc., there's a demand for firearms by the criminal element, and there's no actual supply for the demand, so people make them themselves. Then there's America, where a person working a fast food job can take a week's pay at McDonald's, go down to the local academy, buy himself a brand new Smith & Wesson off the rack. Some Americans look into homemade builds because they're prohibited by law from buying because of a criminal record. Others think the world's going to end and government's going to come and take all their guns away and all this other kind of fun happy stuff. And others just fall into that category of people who like to build shit that goes bang. One of my friends, a guy named Charlie, he runs a YouTube channel called The Unknown Cat. He's got a bunch of videos showing all the cool stuff that he's done. Everything from a single-shot slam-fire shotgun to a drum-fed semi-automatic .22 pistol. And he's supposedly in the process of working up a .45 ACP carbine that feeds from 1911 mags. One of the things I love about Charlie over there at The Unknown Cat, he's extremely conscious of making sure he keeps within the boundaries of the American federal gun laws. Even though most American gun owners find the Bureau of Assault Tax and Fuck Everyone to be an unnecessary and expensive burden to the American taxpayer, they're also the guys who are more than willing to throw you in prison over a shoelace. So it's a good idea to stay on this side of the law when dealing with such matters. If you're a fan of doing it yourself and you like guns, go check out Charlie's channel over there. It's called The Unknown Cat. See the link. As he has shown, it's not really hard to churn out a high-quality firearm using cheap and easily acquired materials. Definitely check it out. We live in a society where police officers live under a completely different set of rules than us normal citizens. We're the people that journalist William Norman Grigg has referred to as the mundanes. Our nation's codified laws, from the federal level down to the most basic of municipal codes, provide all manner of exemption for acts committed by law enforcement, when those same acts could literally get the average citizen thrown in prison and maybe even executed. There is an epidemic of law enforcement abuse throughout this nation, and most of it is the result of officers knowing that under most circumstances, the worst they'll face is being forced to resign from their jobs. Even if it is simply only 1%, all the officers doing all the dirty deeds in the law enforcement community, you're still talking about literally thousands of officers. I wish the problem were that simple. The underlying issue is not only the officers who directly commit random acts of violence and abuse upon people, but their fellow officers who won't do or say anything about it. There is the blue wall of silence that America has known about since the days of Frank Serpico, with officers often believing that their loyalty should lie with their coworkers instead of the public they are paid to serve. Going beyond the violence perpetrated by police, there is also a master-slave mentality that seems to be an ongoing issue, in which officers are often under the false notion that their lives are somehow more important than those of the public. Men and women in body armor who drive around with firearms actually have one of the safest jobs in America, but they put forth the idea that they are sacrificing themselves to the biggest dangers in America. Because of these non-existent dangers, we are expected to put them on a pedestal and treat them as gods amongst men. When officers make mistakes, we are expected to simply deal with it. Charges got dropped? Well, that's nice and all, but you lost your time off from work, bail money, all the legal fees, all that kind of stuff. It's just gone. Your only hope is an expensive lawsuit, and even that won't punish the individual officer beyond maybe costing him his job, as the brunt of the expense will eventually fall back upon you and the rest of your tax-paying neighbors. Currently, there are 3 separate legislative ideas being pushed by the American public that will deal with these issues. The first is a criminal penalty enhancement for officers convicted of breaking the law while in uniform. The second would be a codified removal of what is known as qualified immunity, which is a legal doctrine that prevents people from suing individual officers for acts they've committed while wearing a badge. The third, which would likely be the most immediately useful, is a requirement that all licensed peace officers carry professional liability insurance. As licensed drivers, we're required to carry tens of thousands of dollars worth of insurance on the off chance that we might injure or kill somebody or damage somebody's property with our vehicle. It makes perfect sense that if we allow a person to walk the streets with a firearm and shoot anyone he perceives as a threat, that person should be required to carry insurance on himself in the same way a landscaper or a dentist carries insurance against lawsuits. This would not only eliminate the burden on taxpayers who are forced to pay for the city's liability insurance against such lawsuits, but it would force bad cops to get real jobs. If you get too many speeding tickets or too many claims, your insurance company is either going to raise your rates or just drop you altogether. Why? Because you're a shitty driver. If a cop gets too many complaints or gets sued too often, the cost of insurance would make working as a cop too much of a financial burden. Pretty simple, huh? The only major hurdle we've got to overcome here is mass stupidity and hero worship. Beats the eventual alternative, though. If you're a music lover that spends a lot of time behind the windshield, the past 10 years have been great for technology. I remember back when Vanilla Ice's first album made history, being the first #1 hit to not be released on vinyl, and when Walmart stopped selling cassette tapes. My mind was really warped when I saw an in-car CD changer for the first time. It wasn't long after that car stereos became capable of playing the MP3 format on discs burned in a home computer. Several years ago, I picked up a Pioneer head unit that had a rear-facing USB input. The concept was simple. You ran a USB cable into the glove box or some other location, and you could keep a few hundred songs on a thumb drive. But what if you wanted to keep all of your music in the car? Simple. Get a portable hard drive. For around $50, you can get a decent-sized USB hard drive right off the rack at Walmart, and it should hold a month's worth of music. Keep it all right there at your fingertips, and you can just scroll right through all the different file folders and all that kind of fun happy stuff. No more having to change CDs or swap thumb drives, or hope you don't run out of storage space on your phone. It's just a dedicated hard drive for your car. Simply pull it out and plug it back into your computer when you're ready to add more music, then go plug it right back in. There's a possibility that you'll need to format the hard drive to a FAT32 file system before using it, as many hard drives use a Windows standard file system instead of the generic file allocation table. You'll need a program such as Swiss Knife to do such a thing. About 30 years ago, back when I was a young man, there was a place called Radio Shack. If you were a hobbyist or aspiring mad scientist, this was the place where dreams lived. In addition to stocking a huge selection of transistors and capacitors and anything else you'd need to create a custom circuit or repair your home electronics, they also sold their house brand electronics that were considered to be fairly decent. Fast forward to this past week and we see that the original electronic super chain is going belly up, filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. How did this happen? I'll give you a hint. Go into just about any corporate-owned Radio Shack, that's the actual Radio Shack store, not an independent dealer, and you'll see that the selection is only slightly more specialized than what you'd see at your average Walmart. Gone are the specialty electronics, and the hobbyist section is pretty much just one small aisle with wire and tools on one side, and a pretty crappy selection of individual circuit components on the other. Radio Shack's failure is a prime example of the free market at work. They failed in the business world because they failed to understand their customer base. Radio Shack's booming early success was due largely to the fact that they had what the other guys didn't, and could special order what they didn't have. When they stopped selling to electronics hobbyists and started selling to the general consumer electronics market, they didn't bother to notice there were already a shitload of other bigger fish in that pond. If you're going to compete in a market flooded with other competitors, you're going to have to need the right combination of four things: service, quality of goods, selection, and price. Radio Shack's pricing is roughly on par with Best Buy. The quality and the brand names of their goods is not much better than what you'd find in the electronics section of Big Lots. The service is just about what you'd expect from the post office. When you're charging premium prices on a selection of shitty products being sold by high school kids and middle-aged fuck-ups, the problem isn't convincing people to buy your product. It's convincing people to come into your store in the first place. There used to be a time when Radio Shack was the go-to place to buy cables for your new VCR or a new floppy disk for your home computer. Now it's seen as the last resort for when Walmart and Best Buy are both out of blank DVDs. This is why you have failed, Radio Shack. So long. Last week, the terrorist group ISIS released a professional quality propaganda video that allegedly shows a Jordanian pilot being burned alive after militants placed him in a large metal cage, and then eventually put him out by covering him with a load of sand and gravel from the bucket of a tractor. Oh wait, that's not it. That's actually from a music video when I was in high school. Here you go, that's a shot from the ISIS video. After ISIS kidnapped the Jordanian Air Force pilot and threatened to execute him if a captured ISIS fighter was not released from a Jordanian prison, King Abdullah II vowed to execute 2 members of ISIS being held prisoner if the pilot was not released unharmed. Upon learning of the ISIS killing, Abdullah made good on his word, and both of its ISIS captives were hanged before dawn on Wednesday of last week. As part of King Abdullah's vow of revenge upon ISIS, he has decided to take an active role in the Jordanian bombing runs against the group. The right-wing neoconservative portion of America, that rabidly anti-Obama part of the country that hates the idea of the socialized medicine of Obamacare interfering with their Medicare, seems to have developed a love affair with Middle Eastern monarchs. Granted, our dear leader is a bit lacking in the manliness department when compared to a man who knows how to fly fighter jets. But, if memory serves, America doesn't traditionally like the idea of monarchies. We kind of sort of fought a war so we wouldn't live under the rule of a king. Strangely, the fireworks and bacon crowd who pride themselves on all things America really seem to have fallen in love with a king. Keep in mind, this king is the same man who holds the power to order immediate executions of prisoners, the power to name his successor to the throne, and the power to jump into a jet fighter on his whims. Basically the power to do whatever the hell he wants. While they sit at home bitching about a man who wants to outlaw our guns, demand we pay medical insurance companies for the privilege to exist, bust our national borders wide open, and enforce his whims through executive order, they're simultaneously cheering for a monarch that actually has the legal power to do all these things. While they masturbate to the fantasy of SEAL Team 6 dipping its bullets in pig grease so the evil Muslims can't go to goat-fucker heaven, terrorists, they lavish praises on King Abdullah for not being a girly man like our own president, who is, of course, a secretly gay Kenyan Muslim terrorist. This cognitive dissonance didn't seem to affect America's opinions on any of the sons of King Abdulaziz ibn Saud, I think I got that right, I hope so, who ruled the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia since 1953. For some reason, a continuous flow of gasoline and allowing us to rent land over there for our military bases seems to have kept our neoconservative friends quiet about the Sharia law that cuts people's hands and heads off in public. God bless America. America! A few months before my birth, in December of 1978, the Ford Motor Company rolled out the third generation of its Mustang muscle car. Based around the same Fox chassis as the '77 Fairmont, it was offered with 7 different engine configurations, including the turbocharged inline 4-cylinder produced by Ford's Special Vehicle Operations Group. While the SVO Turbo Stang was definitely a well-received vehicle, the motor that put the Mustang on the map for people of my generation was the Windsor 302 V8. They branded it as the 5.0. In 1987, the car retained the Fox chassis but had a slight cosmetic redesign. Engine selections were chopped down to the base model 4-cylinder and the Windsor 5.0. In 1989, the fuel injection system was changed from speed density to mass airflow. From the factory, this cut the horsepower to a very minor degree, but it made modifications to the engine much easier for the computer to handle. The Fox Mustang was discontinued in 1993, but was still alive and well in the mid to late 90s of my high school career. And the only limit on the amount of horsepower you could get out of it was how much money you could put into it. Everyone had the K&N air filter and the Flowmaster mufflers that produced the signature 5.0 Mustang sound. Throw in some 1.7 roller rockers, some underdrive pulleys, a new cam, some BBK equal-length headers, an X-pipe with no cats, some trick flow heads, a set of drag radials on the back end, and a GT40 intake were the things every high school kid with a Stang really wanted. The goal was hitting the quarter-mile finish line in the low 13s. Quit reminiscing, hop into your LX coupe, and power shift that center force clutch until the 8.8 axle falls off. While you're thinking about all that, enjoy some footage of the 1993 SVT Cobra. Open carry, the legend continues. Last week we covered the open carry movement in Texas and did a short spotlight on Cory Watkins' interaction with Texas legislator Pancho Nevarez. It was an event captured on video that eventually led to the installation of panic buttons in the state capitol offices of our lawmakers. Over the course of the past week, several other state legislatures have introduced the same type of constitutional carry law proposed by House Bill 195 and its equivalent in the state Senate. In case you missed it, Texas outlawed the carry of handguns in public back before the light bulb was invented. 20 years ago, the Texas legislature allowed adult citizens the right to apply for a license as long as they were willing to shell out several $100s for a permission slip and never let their handguns be seen in public. Since our upload on Sunday, the local and national press has been all over Watkins, claiming he has threatened the lives of legislators for failing to support House Bill 195 and another widely viewed web video. In defense of Watkins, I will say that I have seen the video, and there is not a single news outlet I'm aware of that is honestly and accurately reporting what was said. Most have edited Watson's comments in a manner that are intentionally misleading, while some have taken to claiming that he has directly threatened to take the lives of Texas legislators for not sharing his political views. Obviously, making such threats is a highly illegal act, and Mr. Watkins would be in jail right now if he actually did such a thing. If you recall our coverage of Barrett Brown from last weekend, a felony conviction in federal court was obtained when Brown simply threatened in a YouTube video to utter a federal agent's home address. It'd be silly to suggest a person with zero mainstream support could threaten a state legislator's life and not be arrested for it. The author of House Bill 195 is now declaring that the bill has been intentionally sent before the House Committee on Homeland Security and Public Safety in an effort to kill the bill in light of the fact that the committee is co-chaired by the same Pancho Navarez that was allegedly threatened by Watkins. Meanwhile, a licensed open carry bill that is opposed by supporters of Open Carry Texas because it requires paying a license fee was fast-tracked in the state Senate by way of reassigning it a bill number below 20. It originally had a bill number somewhere over 300. It, along with a bill that would legalize concealed carry on college campuses, were discussed in testimony before the state Senate on Thursday. Both are expected to eventually be signed into legislation. Republican House Speaker Joe Strauss, who has not indicated support for the current Texas GOP platform stance on constitutional carry, has been recently quoted saying there's not enough support for constitutional carry in Texas. Many supporters of constitutional carry point to the more than $41 million in revenue that the state has collected from new license fees in 2014. This figure does not include renewal licenses, new instructor licenses, or renewal instructor licenses. The end result of a licensed open carry law is still a requirement that a person shell out over $400 for a state-issued permission slip. Two very important facts should be mentioned on that last point. First, the legal requirement of a fee transforms a right into a privilege. Second, free men don't ask permission. In the wake of the Sandy Hook and Aurora theater shootings, Colorado and Connecticut passed the standard knee-jerk gun grabber responses in their respective state legislatures. Essentially, they decided to ban as much as they could. Both were miserable failures. Connecticut passed a law banning the sale of so-called assault weapons on the basis of cosmetic features, as well as a ban on standard capacity magazines holding more than 10 rounds. No one, as of yet, has been able to explain how 10 rounds is acceptable for public safety, but 11 rounds is inherently dangerous. In addition to Connecticut's ban on new weapon and magazine sales, such items owned prior to the enactment of the ban were required by law to be registered with the state. It is estimated that fewer than 10% of owners complied, instantly turning untold thousands of previously law-abiding citizens into felons waiting to be caught. Their crime? They didn't do anything. In Colorado, a similar ban on standard capacity magazines was passed, undoubtedly riding on the coattails of the Aurora tragedy, where, unlike Sandy Hook, an AR-15 actually was used. Ironically, the nation's most prolific manufacturer of aftermarket parts and magazines for the AR-15 is actually located in Boulder, Colorado. Employees of the Magpul Corporation were allowed to produce a standard 30-round AR-15 magazine, but were not allowed to own one. In short order, Magpul promptly left Colorado and headed for the greener pastures of Texas, while the legislators responsible for the ban were tossed out of office in a recall election. On the 6th of this month, U.S. Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey and U.S. House Representative Elizabeth Esty of Connecticut have introduced federal legislation to pass a nationwide ban on standard capacity magazines holding more than 10 rounds. Exempted from this proposed ban are .22 caliber tube feed magazines, cops, and retired cops. The proposed penalty for violating the ban is a 10-year prison sentence. Thankfully, regardless of obstacles standing in the way of gaining restoration of rights taken away from us by government, it is considered political suicide to pass new gun control laws in this country at the present time. Unlike the 1980s, where Republicans like Reagan and Bush publicly supported a ban on so-called assault weapons, and didn't veto the 1986 machine gun ban, gun control is currently seen as a liberal issue that must be opposed at all costs by anyone attempting to pass himself off as a conservative. Because of this, and both houses of the U.S. Congress being controlled by the GOP, such bills are dead on arrival and will likely never make it out of a committee. In the meantime, I think I'm going to go place an order for another half dozen PMags.
Respect my authority!
Now let's go from Colorado to Perth Amboy, New Jersey. Police Chief Benjamin Ruiz was recently indicted for theft when he used a city mechanic to perform repair work on his motorcycle, his 1964 Mustang, and a friend's vehicle. All of this was done while the mechanic was on the city's clock. In addition to the theft of service and official misconduct charges he picked up for abusing his position for personal financial gain by having the city of Perth Amboy pick up the tab for his auto repairs, he's also been charged with witness tampering for attempting to convince a potential witness to lie in his favor during the investigations. Congratulations, Chief Benjamin Ruiz. You are this week's Dumbass with a Badge. Hope you all enjoyed the show, and remember, send any hate mail or segment suggestions to thezombiranch@gmail.com. See y'all later.